Hi there, this is Susan McCord from the Augusta Chronicle. Today we're live from the rural Athens, Georgia home of a man who may be Georgia's next governor, Secretary of State Brian Kemp. And we appreciate all the questions that you have sent in. If you have anything else you'd like to ask him, you feel free to do so in the comments. And so, Secretary Kemp, would you like to maybe briefly introduce yourself?
I'll be glad to, Susan. Thanks so much for being here. Believe it or not, it's on this 40 acres right here where Marty and I are raising our 3 teenage daughters. We're only 7 miles from Sanford Stadium, where the Georgia Bulldogs will be playing tomorrow afternoon. So we're got a beautiful spot out here, but not too far from town. So it's been a great place to live and raise our daughters, and it's also been a good town to work in. As many of you probably know by now, I started my first business with a pickup truck and a shovel over 30 years ago. Was really involved in our local community, but also as a frustrated small businessman, and got fed up and decided to do something about it. I ran for a state Senate seat against an incumbent back in 2002. Served 2 terms in the legislature and fought to reduce regulations, reduce taxes, and bring common sense values to the district. After coming back here for about 3 years and focusing on helping raise the girls with Marty and I, focused on a lot of business stuff I had going on and other things that I was doing at the time. But I felt like it was time for a common sense, tell it like it is business person to be in the Secretary of State's office to really reform that agency top to bottom and stand up and make sure we have secure, accessible, and fair elections in our state, and we've got a great record of doing so. And that's exactly why I'm running for governor. I'm the only one in the race who's had legislative experience, executive branch experience, running a large agency like the Secretary of State's office, 250 employees, day-to-day operations, and being in the private sector for 30 years. And I'm running on a very simple 4-point plan to make Georgia #1 for small business by cutting government regulations, kind of building off the great place that we are now, being #1 for business. Fundamentally reforming how state government spends, taxes, and operates so that we can fund the things that we should in state government, like public safety, education, transportation, and infrastructure, and healthcare and other things, but also continue on the path of lower taxes, broad-based tax reform that will help all working Georgians out there. But we also, with the mention of rural Georgia, we've also got to make sure that no matter what your zip code is, you have the same opportunities as anyone else in our state. And that is why I've focused a lot on strengthening rural Georgia, making sure that people have access to high-speed internet, access to a good quality education, low health care cost, and a plan that will actually work in today's market, as well as making sure they have economic opportunities so that all states or all counties around our state have good opportunities for the local community from an economic perspective. But lastly, we need a governor that will put Georgians first ahead of the special interest, the status quo, and the politically correct. And a big part of that for me as a father of 3 teenage daughters is public safety reform, making sure that we're keeping our Georgia families safe. And I've got detailed plans to do that, going after criminal drug cartels that have created a distribution network in our state, as well as stopping and dismantling over 70,000 gang members in our state. So I look forward to your questions. We got a lot more information on our website at kempforgovernor.com. We'd be honored to have your vote and support.
Well, to start off, this is just kind of a question I've had for some time. It's just something I've been wondering. You grew up in Athens, not a huge, farm town, but you've, gone on to have a lot of agricultural type businesses. How did you become this ag guy?
Well, really started quite a long time ago when I was growing up. I had a good friend of mine that actually went to Oconee County High School, which is a public high school out in, obviously, Oconee County, which is right next to Clark, south of Athens. And his family had some cows, so I grew up working out there. We tried to go out there and do something fun, and Mr. Malcolm would call us down to the barn to help him work the cows. So, I got involved. I just liked that atmosphere, and it was a beautiful place. And then when I got to the University of Georgia, I had been working in the construction industry and had a friend that was in the ag mechanization and technology program, and it had a lot of similar classes that you took that had to do with construction, but it was in the ag engineering school. And I switched my major and graduated from there, so I learned a lot about agriculture there. And I had a good friend of mine I was at Georgia with that also had a farm up in Spencer, Virginia, which is about an hour above Winston-Salem. So I spent a lot of time working on their farm as well. So I always saw the value of agriculture. And then when I served in the legislature, you know, people don't realize this, but my Senate district, which was Clark, Oconee, Oglethorpe, and parts of Madison County, and my first district had parts of Jackson and Barrow, was always in the top 5 in farm gate value. So we have a lot of poultry, horticulture, hay, you know, vegetables, and other things that are going on around this area. So I was representing a lot of rural ag-related districts, and I saw firsthand, serving as the secretary on the ag committee, that we weren't doing enough in agriculture, I didn't think at the time. And I got real involved with that, was an advocate for ag and agribusiness. I know it's the #1 industry in our state by far. A lot of people don't realize that. It helps keep our economy diverse. So that's what really drew me into not only being friendly of agriculture and knowing the value of it, but also to start looking at it from business opportunities, and that's evolved to some things that I've done in the private sector.
Well, it looks like a lot of our listeners have really got, you know, current events on their minds. We've had a lot of questions come in about the hearing yesterday. Sure. One from some lady in Athens, you know, in light of the current process going on with the confirmation hearing of Judge Kavanaugh, what do you feel are the essential qualifications for a Supreme Court justice? And do you believe Judge Kavanaugh demonstrated these qualities yesterday?
Well, that's certainly not a decision I'm going to make. I haven't been able to talk to Judge Kavanaugh, nor have I been able to watch all the hearings. I'm trusting our 2 U.S. senators to take all that information in and make the right decision, and I believe that they will as the process unfolds.
I know there was a group of women who asked you to retract your support for Kavanaugh. Would you do that?
No, I do not plan on doing that. I think that was a political stunt, quite honestly. I have said many times leading up to yesterday that I felt like both sides should be heard. They were heard yesterday, and now it's up to the committee to decide whether to vote the nomination forward, and if they decide to do that, then it'll be up to the body of the U.S. Senate to vote up or down vote on Judge Kavanaugh, and I trust that process. That's how it's supposed to work. I was glad that both sides got to be heard yesterday.
Also had a little run on these type of questions. I mean, what would you do to protect the unborn?
Is that it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I have a strong pro-life record when I was in the legislature, and also have as Secretary of State, and certainly have a strong pro-life agenda as a candidate for governor. I've pledged to push and sign a heartbeat bill which will prevent abortions when there's a heartbeat detected. I think most Georgians believe in life, and they certainly believe that when a child is in a womb and has a heartbeat, that they should not be aborted. You know, it's quite the contrast to my opponent who believes in late-term abortions, which I absolutely do not.
Do you know about what point a heartbeat is typically?
Well, I think it depends on, you know, what's going on with the pregnancy in the womb at the time, but I believe that's around 6 weeks or so, 6 to 9 weeks.
Let's see, and guns, I guess, popular. Could you talk about, this is a woman, I guess, in Atlanta asking, can you explain how having more guns around her small children could make them safer?
Well, I certainly support the Second Amendment. I've been very clear on that from day one. I hunt, I shoot, and I carry, and I have firearms in this home to protect my wife and my children. My wife exercises that same right, and I respect the right of families to do that. And there can't be a policeman guarding every home in our state, and I certainly appreciate and support the Second Amendment and the ability for families to protect themselves and also to enjoy the things that they enjoy for people that want to be around and own firearms and shoot and take place in hunting activities.
And of course, we all saw the commercials. Have you ever actually pulled out a shotgun when someone came by to pick up your daughter for a date?
Well, I can tell you this, when people come into my home, they certainly know that I have firearms in the home, and they respect the Second Amendment, and they know that they need to respect my daughters. And I've heard many stories on the campaign trail about other things that that other fathers and families have done with their daughters. But I'm not trying to be everyone's parent. I'm just trying to be the parent of my 3 teenage daughters.
This has come up, and I have not really heard of this issue before, but it was about a rape crisis center in DeKalb County. Did you vote against funding this center? Could you speak to that?
I would have to know something more specific to talk about an individual vote. I've been a big supporter of rape crisis centers. In fact, when I was involved in the local Home Builders Association, we did a lot of volunteer work helping with the rape crisis center here, and I'm very proud of that.
Okay, so you're not familiar with a vote to restore funding for the rape crisis center in DeKalb?
I wouldn't have any idea about that issue. I would be very surprised if there was state funding for that. It seems like that would probably be a local funding issue, but I'd have to look at the specific bill or whether it was a budget bill or, we literally vote on, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of legislation during the legislative session.
And I know you've addressed this a good bit, but could you explain again why you oppose expanding Medicaid?
Well, number one, it's not working. Number two, we can't afford it. And number three, there's better options. The doctors right now are losing 14 cents on the dollar for every Medicaid patient they take. Plus, doctors aren't taking Medicaid patients. 67% of doctors are not taking Medicaid patients. So I don't think expanding a program that's broken is going to fix it. I believe in working hard to lower healthcare costs, lower prescription drug costs by doing things like association health plans to make it more affordable on our families, also creating high-risk pools to take care of those that have pre-existing conditions.
So you think pre-existing conditions should always be covered?
Depending on, absolutely, in regard to what program and what population that you're talking about.
Do you feel like expanding Medicaid would it not bring a lot of new money to the state?
Well, I don't think it's going to bring any new money to the state. It's going to bring, federal dollars, but the problem is you have to match that with state dollars, and the program's not working. So regardless, that's why we have such a federal deficit and a broken system at the federal level. And what happens when the federal government changes the match, which they absolutely will do, that's going to double the rate on the state dollars that you have to have. But the bottom line is it's still not going to help provide access to the patients because the doctors can't afford it. The best thing to do, in my opinion, would be to open up populations like blind, aged, and disabled to create competition in the market to lower costs where you could increase provider rates. That's what will help provide more access for the Medicaid population. And remember, we're already covering blind, aged, and disabled as well as children. What my opponent wants to do really is to have government-run single-payer health care that will cost billions and will cost tax dollars to be raised on every working Georgia family at an astronomical rate. And that is absolutely not the way to go. That is going to cut down on your access to health care, and it'll also cut down on the ability for you to choose your own doctor.
Earlier this week, I think you announced a plan to raise all teachers' pay by $5,000. Is that every public school teacher, and how would you do that?
Correct. $5,000 across the board teacher pay raise. As you know, a couple of years, not in this year's budget, but budget before last, the legislature gave a 2% raise. We're proposing a flat $5,000 pay raise. No matter what level of teachers you are, 44% of our educators, new educators, are leaving teaching within the first 5 years of getting in the profession. So there's a terrible retention rate for our teachers. So this $5,000 salary raise will help incentivize people to come into the system and incentivize them to stay in the system. That is what we've heard from the teachers and the folks at the local level. So we're very excited to do that. It's a $600 million expense on the budget, which our revenues have increased $900 million. So there's existing dollars to do that. So we feel very confident about our numbers and how we're going to pay for that, and it'll still allow for us to continue to lower tax rates like we're done last year. But we're also going to do more than that for educators. We're going to get some of the ridiculous mandates and testing that they're dealing with, the extra duties that they have, and just allow them to teach our children, provide more local control. Also, part of our school safety plan was to fund one counselor in every high school, every public high school in our state, to help take some of the counseling, mental health duties that have now just become really increased in our school systems that our teachers and our administrators are having to deal with. So we think from talking to educators and administrators, this will be something else that will be very welcomed in our high schools to help alleviate some of the difficult burdens. This will help with the instances of the shooters inside schools or dangerous individuals inside schools, that no matter how hard you harden the outside of the school, the problem is a lot of these incidents happen from people that, you know, are legally inside the school, students or other people that are having issues at home, mental health, you know, domestic disputes that flow down to the child or the individual. So this is coming completely from feedback we got on the local level, and then we'll also provide a one-time grant, if you will, to help harden the school, which the school system will have flexibility to do that. That'll be for all schools in our state. Get metal detectors, harden the outside of the school, meaning door locks and automatic entry, or you know, automatic shutting down systems, or open them up from an exterior standpoint, cameras, you know, whatever fits their school best. So we're very excited to take the lead on school safety reform.
And as far as the raises, I mean, those will be for public school teachers, not private.
Correct, public school teachers.
And
talking about state dollars
the
there.
State could afford this extra $600 million
Absolutely.
Here on out.
That's correct. Okay. And you know, we're having the ability to do this now because last year on the existing budget, as you know, the governor's funded over $360 million to the teachers' retirement fund. That need will not be in the upcoming budget. It'll be much smaller than that. And there's been other things that have been used to pay for different things over the last couple of years. So, you know, the money is there, the revenues are there. It's never a better time to do it. We've got one of the best states in the country, but we need to do more in education. K through 12 is one of the priorities when you think about, you know, continuing to have our graduations go up, and also have a quality workforce in the future. That's one of the big needs of all the employers in our state. So I think it will be money that will be well spent.
Would you support expanding available funding for charter schools not in the public system?
Well, I'm not sure what that question means.
Well, I mean, I think right now there's some state money that does go to schools outside of the public school system. Would you?
Well, I've been I'm going to be a strong supporter of public education in our state. I think you can see from our latest policy proposals on school safety, teacher pay raises, undoing mandates. I didn't even mention, pre-K and early learning, keeping those programs going, the great work that First Lady Sandra Dill and Governor Dill have done, making sure that we protect our private care providers, which are providing pre-K slots where a lot of school systems are not, which is something that my opponent wants to get rid of. So I'm going to be a robust advocate for public education, but also support school choice. And I trust the parents to be able to make decisions for their children, like in these private provider pre-K programs, the charter schools and charter systems. And I think that's healthy for our state, and I will definitely be supportive of those in the future.
So if elected, would you sign the Religious Freedom Restoration Act?
Well, I think it's important for people to know my position because it depends on what RFRA legislation you're talking about. And there's been a lot of different versions of that, which is why early on in the campaign, I said that what I will sign and support will be only a reference to the words that are exactly written in the federal statute that was passed in 1993 and signed by Bill Clinton with Al Gore standing by his side. That bill was carried by Senator Ted Kennedy. It does absolutely not discriminate, but it protects religious freedom. That is what I will sign, nothing more and nothing less.
Okay, well, that is, 25 years ago? You don't think any changes might be necessary?
Well, they hadn't made changes at the federal level, so I see no need to change them at the state level. There's 31 other states that have that same law or that same law has been adjudicated in their state, and that is what I'm supporting.
So if the legislature presents you with something that's different from that, you just would never sign it?
Correct. I'm going to insist on that one piece of legislation that's very narrowly written to just describe the federal statute. It does not discriminate, but it protects religious freedom. I think that's the balance that we need, and we get that issue behind us once we do that.
And you don't think that could potentially hurt the state as far as big job prospects?
Well, I think anybody that would not come to our state because we have a law that references exactly what's in the federal statute would also have to move their business out of the country because that's the same language that the federal statute deals with. That's what is so good in my eyes about what I support.
There's been a lot of talk about the Secretary of State's office involvement in licensing, and I think you've said that you do not control that process, I guess. So what would you suggest to do about boards that might be licensing sex offenders or whatever, things that people that should not be licensed?
Well, first of all, that's not up to the Secretary of State. It's up to the legislature. The duties of the board are set in state law, and I took an oath to follow state law. Now, as governor, I have a lot of different opinions on licensing and regulations, and I'm glad to talk about that. But I think for your viewers, it's important to realize the Secretary of State does the administrative duties of the licensing board. The board members that are appointed by the current governor are the ones that follow the laws that are written in the statute for that profession, and then they set what the fees are and other regulations that they have, under the purview of that law. So the Secretary of State does not have the ability to license someone. I do not have the ability to revoke someone's license. Those are administrative. We do we go through the paperwork and present that to the board, and then when there's enforcement actions, we do the investigations, we present the findings of that to the board, and then there's a due process that the board must go through because we need to have a due process, and that's exactly how that process works. And unfortunately, there's been several candidates in the campaign that have not been telling the truth and blaming myself and the good, hard-working people at the Secretary of State's office for some of these things, which is just absolutely a lie and ridiculous.
So your role is just merely administrative.
That's right.
Well, as governor, I've heard discussions of what ought need to be done about all these boards. I mean, do you see making a lot of changes to the licensing boards?
Well, I think the way the system is set up now, it's been changed for the better because of a Supreme Court ruling a couple of years ago in a North Carolina dental board case. So there's now a licensing officer in the governor's office. So if there's things that the boards are doing that are overarching or hurting competition or unburden some rules or regulations, that individual can have veto power, if you will, to send that back to the board to work on further. But it really starts at the legislative process and what the legislature wants to do. And while there are instances of things that have happened, there is a process to go through that. It's not only the Secretary of State's office that's involved. You also have the Attorney General's office. Lawyers are working with the board, and they're having to, once the board passes does the hearing, the Attorney General's office is involved in different settlements or whatever the judicial process is representing the licensing board. So there's a lot of moving parts there, but I'm always looking to reform things to have more streamlined processes and systems that are set up, but you also have to protect individuals by having due process, and that's a lot of what this process is.
I had a few questions come in. I know you've discussed this before, but do you think it's ethical to be running for governor while you're still employed as Secretary of State?
Oh, absolutely. I'm working hard every day as Secretary of State. Matter of fact, I was on a conference call for an hour today on the Safe Elections Commission, moving forward with getting ready for our third meeting to go to a 21st century voting system in our state. We've been working on that project for over a year now, doing a pilot back in 2017 on a type of system we could move to in the future. I've been working every single day, and it's no different than anyone else that was running for office. Just like I ran for re-election as Secretary of State, and just like Kathy Cox, who was Secretary of State, that was a Democrat, by the way, ran for governor when she was Secretary of State, and other elected officials. I elected not to resign my office, even when some days it probably would have been easier to do that, because I made a commitment to the citizens to serve in this role, and I honor and value that, unlike my opponent who resigned for political purposes.
And the SAFE Commission, you had a meeting in Grovetown recently.
We did.
Where is the commission in the process of finding a new system? Well,
we're right in the middle of the process. The goal of the plan that I laid out with this great bipartisan committee that's literally represented by, all different political bodies, local folks, and we're having public meetings, so everyone that wants to be engaged can be engaged in this process. We've had 2 meetings. We've got a third one that we're going to be doing in Macon here coming up in just the next few weeks. And the last meeting, we actually in Grovetown evaluated the potential systems that are out there from different vendors. Our call today was talking through the nuts and bolts of those systems and kind of how we move forward as a commission in the future. And we got a lot of great feedback from the members that were on that call today. And the plan is to have a new voting system by the time the 2020 election cycle gets here. But that'll take a lot of work. We're going to have to get all this done, make recommendations to the legislature next year. They'll have to, change the law for us to move forward. You'll have to have money appropriated to pay for it. And you've got a long process of implementing the system and then training the local elections officials on whatever new system you move to. So we've got a tremendous amount of work ahead of us, and it's going really good. We've got a great team in the Secretary of State's office that's been working on that, as well as preparing for this year's election, which we're right in the middle of right now.
Well, do you think the new system will be one of the ones that was demonstrated at the meeting in Grovetown?
Well, I would say most likely it would, because I think everybody that has systems that are viable in the marketplace were at that meeting and presented and have been talking to the commission and our office to make sure that we understand how those systems work. But that's ultimately something that we'll decide when we continue through the process.
Judge Totenberg's ruling was fairly critical of the state and its handling of elections. Did you think the ruling was fair? Or would you like to go
Well, I think the ruling was certainly a victory for the Secretary of State's office. I know that is exactly the way I took it. It would have been ridiculous to change to anything other than our current system. It was not only me saying that, it was our local elections officials that are actually running the day-to-day operations of elections around the state. We are appealing that ruling, so I really can't comment further, but that was a great victory for our office, and we've moved on and we're getting ready for this election.
The ruling was pretty full of criticism of the state's handling. Did you think the criticism was warranted? Or?
Well, I'm going to be glad to speak on that issue when I can. And that's all I'll say about that right now, but we're glad that we won a strong victory in court, and we'll deal with the other, I guess, words that were in the ruling.
I mean, looking back, you feel like you've handled elections well over the last 8 or 9 years?
I wouldn't say well. I'd say that we have done a tremendous job having secure, accessible, fair elections in Georgia. And if you'll just allow me a minute, I'll let people know the real story about what we have done. When you think back to, when I first took office and where we are now, we have 800,000 more registered voters on our rolls than we did when I took office. I think a lot of reason that is because we have worked very hard to make elections more accessible in our state, creating an online voter registration system, which quite honestly did not exist before I became Secretary of State. It's one of my first legislative accomplishments, as well as electronic ballot delivery. So now literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, any Georgian can go register to vote either on the Secretary of State's website, which is sos.ga.gov, or on our free mobile app, which you can download on your phone at GASOS. You can also register other people on your own phone if you have the app. They simply just have to give you their driver's license information, put that in the system, send it off, pre-populates. You don't ever have to deal with a state or a county employee. Goes into the county dashboard. They review that entry. It automatically generates a precinct card, which is mailed to you, and you are registered to vote. So it's been fantastic. On the electronic ballot delivery, we now have the ability for Georgians, or for military and overseas voters, to request an electronic ballot delivery. So we can actually email a ballot to any person anywhere overseas or soldier that's serving us, which speeds up the time, cuts it in half for voting absentee in Georgia. We got all of those out starting last Saturday, those requests that we have. There's people voting those ballots right now. All they have to do is print it out and send it back. So we're very proud of efforts like that, as well as efforts like our Student Ambassadors program, where we now have over 150 high schools and over 1,500 Georgia high school students that are participating in that program. We have trained them on civics, on government, on being part of their local community and being part of the elections process and what that means, and how so many people have struggled to get the right to vote. And that program has been incredible. This is a great bunch of kids. There's a competition and a website where these schools are all competing against each other. They get points for doing voter registration drives, for helping volunteer at their local elections office, or doing community service projects. Very creative things that they have done. And because of that program, it is now basically self-sustaining. And we have the number of 17 and a half and 18-year-olds that have registered to vote in the state of Georgia in the last 3 years has actually doubled. So we're very proud of that. On the security of the election side, no one has done more to keep elections secure than myself. We've completely revamped our IT division well before all this, talk started about other outside groups, saying our elections aren't secure, which is absolutely not the case. No one has ever hacked the Secretary of State's office or gotten into any of our systems, and we're working hard to make sure that that continues to be the case every single day. And I also would urge people to look at turnout. In our presidential election in 2016, regardless of whether you thought it was a good result or a bad result, there's no doubt about it. We had record turnout in that election. We had record turnout in a special primary congressional race with Karen Handel and John Ossoff up in Atlanta when Tom Price got nominated to Health and Human Services Secretary during that same process. And then in our presidential preference primary, where I implemented the idea of a regional primary in the Southeast called the SEC primary, brought every major presidential candidate to Georgia, had us on the map as a state for the first time in a very, very, very long time, so that our citizens could weigh in on who the next president would be. And we had record number of votes in that race. So we're very proud of that record, and we're looking forward to a great election coming up here that we're actually right in the middle of right now that'll be concluded on November the 6th.
Well, another question about the RFRA. If there's already a protection in federal law, why spend state dollars to do anything else?
Well, it's not going to cost any state dollars to pass a piece of legislation. That obviously happens every year. The problem is it has not been adjudicated or put into law at the state level, which the way the law works, that's the protection that's needed, and that's why I support it.
And so you didn't really have a chance to watch the hearings yesterday?
Yeah, very little of it.
Do you know if you believe what
I'm sorry?
Did you believe the accuser, or did you not have a chance to listen to her?
I haven't really been able to watch too much of it. I'm trusting our U.S. senators who have to make that decision to, take all the evidence. I mean, they've met with Judge Kavanaugh. I've never talked to him. I've never talked to Dr. Ford. I just don't know that much about it, quite honestly, other than, reading the news reports.
Got 3 minutes.
And so, Governor Deal will probably be remembered, largely for these criminal justice reforms that have been made under his leadership. How would you continue that legacy?
Well, I think Governor Deal will be remembered for more than just criminal justice reform. I mean, he's been a great governor, just like I feel like Sonny Perdue was before him. I've had the opportunity to serve with both of those gentlemen, and knew both of the first ladies. And we've had a lot of great governors throughout the years in our state. People like Joe Frank Harris, who I was a friend of his sons, and Zell Miller, and many others. But I think Governor Deal will be remembered for having a great economy when he leaves office and going through a really tough time. And Sonny Perdue went through a lot of that as well, and did a really great work in a very tough budget environment himself. And I want to build off that. I want to build off that and do public safety reform and keep our families safe. That is a commitment that I have as a father of 3 teenage daughters. Certainly have been very supportive of criminal justice reform. But to me, the next step is to start going after some of these violent criminals, some of these illegal drug cartels that are literally poisoning and killing our citizens. And that is exactly what I'm going to be doing as governor.
In the Augusta area, we are having a large influx of military folks these days, and I don't think we've talked about what you hope to do with military and veterans. Could you speak to that?
Well, I'm obviously a strong supporter of everything that's going on at the Cyber Center at Fort Gordon in the Augusta and Columbia County, and it's going to really, I've talked to a lot of people in counties that are outside of Richmond and Columbia. that understand that, you know, how big the cyber center is, the effect it's going to have on the economy and the bedroom communities around there. So no one will be more supportive than I will. Certainly Governor Deal's been very supportive, as the local community has. I will continue that as governor. We have a robust plan to not only support our military with tax exemption for retirees, workforce programs, expanding the Vector program through the technical college system, where it's more readily available than just the program that's in Houston County that's right near the Warner Robins Air Force Base. I've been there. I've seen firsthand how that's helping not only with workforce development issues with retiring or returning veterans, but also helping with mental health issues and other things that those individuals are dealing with. So I'm going to be very supportive of that, as well as supporting all of our bases with a military liaison in the governor's office that will work with local communities to continue not only to protect our bases, but to help promote additional missions. That is a huge part of our economy. It's also a huge part of my plan to strengthen rural Georgia, because I know there's a lot of rural Georgians that work at our military institutions, even if that institution is in a fairly populated area, you know, like Augusta or Columbia County, and I'll be a governor that's going to do that. And people can know I'm telling the truth on that, because I've been a strong supporter of the military as Secretary of State. I mentioned our electronic ballot delivery. We've worked with Governor Deal on the licensing task force for returning veterans and their spouses to help speed up the licensing process for those that are trying to get in professions that are underneath the purview of the Secretary of State's office, meaning we speed up the administrative process to get them in the workforce. And then we've also hired a military liaison. We've actually got the spouse of a veteran right now that is serving in that role. Her sole duty is to work with the bases, with VA facilities, you know, with any other military group, spouses that are out there, to let them know how they can vote, how military and overseas voters can vote, how they get registered to vote, help be a liaison to our licensing division or our corporations division. We are a pro-military, pro-veteran Secretary of State's office, and I'll do exactly the same as governor.
Well, I think we've about run out of time. If you'd like to say a couple of words to close things out. Thank you very much for agreeing to do this today.
My pleasure. I'm a big fan of the CSRA. I've been there many times in my days as Secretary of State, and certainly on my campaign for governor. We've got a lot of great folks that are supporting my campaign. I'd love for you to join us. You can learn more about all of these plans and ideas that we have to move our state forward and to put Georgians first at our website, kempforgovernor.com. Hope you'll sign up and volunteer, and I'd be honored to have your vote. Thank you so much.